Within the confines of the sterile shopping mall, you'll find one of the most popular stops is a purveyor of legumes, and it's only open late. Of course, we're talking about Tyler's Nut Shack as we zero in on Tyler Matzek in our Stock Watch series here on Battery Power. I'm Cory McCartney along with Grant McAuley. And Grant, among those who are going to be folk heroes within the Braves championship run this past season, I think few, if any, players are going to rank higher than Tyler Matzek on that list. It was there in his being part of the night shift bullpen and for delivering one of the biggest postseason innings in recent memory against the Dodgers in the NLCS.
Yeah, it was an unbelievable kind of atmosphere that the Braves found themselves in October. They were going to need heroes. Some of them you were going to be really familiar with, you hoped. Others were guys who were going to kind of be not even unsung. They were going to be guys whose names you were going to remember as reasons why the Braves won the World Series. I don't know that anybody, save maybe Jorge Soler and perhaps Eddie Rosario, came more out of nowhere than Tyler Matzek did. And really, his path to being a part of the Braves bullpen, to being world champion, man, that's a story I can't wait to get into here. People know it really well, but I still think that it bears repeating, or at least bears revisiting, as we plot the course for a 2022 in which I think the Braves are going to be once again looking for the big lefty to provide some lights out relief. And I will never forget being in the ballpark to watch him blow away 3 Dodgers hitters with a chance that the series could be hanging in the balance and just blowing away, vaporizing Mookie Betts. That's one of the all-time great Braves postseason moments in this past postseason or any October the Braves have been a part of.
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that I think, you could almost be seeing it in a movie or something years down the line. Just when you think about overcoming yips and being a first-round draft pick, all the things that went into Tyler Matzek being a consistent contributor for this Braves team. A 1.1 F4 season for him last year in which he posted a 2.57 ERA. He struck out 11 per 9 in 69 appearances. He had a ridiculous 182 batting average against, which I want to get into for a minute here. Yeah. Six relievers across 60 innings pitched had a better average against than him last year in all of baseball. And if in terms of Braves, if you go back to 1966, there have been 7 seasons in which a reliever held opponents to a lower average than which Matzek did in 2021. 4 of those belong to a guy who will probably be in the Hall of Fame in Craig Kimbrell. Another one via a guy who probably should be in the Hall of Fame as well in Billy Wagner. The other 2, by the way, Johnny Venters and Luis Avalon. I mean, it was all just an appetizer, though, Grant, because he had a 1.72 ERA in the postseason, 13 appearances, 24 strikeouts to 4 walks, and a 492 opponent OPS. And you mentioned it. It got no bigger than what went down in the 7th inning of Game 6 against the Dodgers.
No doubt about it. And when I looked at Matzek's numbers, just like you did, I saw a lot of the same things. This sub 200 average against, not at all surprising. Now, the fact that when he got into the postseason, the walks, which were really the only thing that you could kind of point to and say, hey, if you could clean that up again, bring that down maybe 1 per 9 at least, get it into a more workable range. But then you jump a couple columns over and you see that he averages basically 6 hits per 9 innings and that opponents had a sub 600 OPS against Tyler Matzek in both of his years in a Braves uniform. So this is a guy that does all the things that you need a leverage reliever to do, regardless of what inning he's throwing. And this was not necessarily the path that Tyler Matzek set out on in his big league career for what would be his biggest moments and hopefully greatest successes. Of course, you want to win a World Series. That goes without saying. But as you mentioned, a first-round draft pick, he was picked 14 selections ahead of a guy named Mike Trout. So that lets you know what the Rockies were looking for was a pitcher to hopefully help build their franchise into a consistent contender. But that didn't last very long for Tyler. He made a couple of more stops after his control problems and injuries ended his time in Colorado in 2016. He was briefly a White Sox, didn't throw an organized game there, briefly a Mariner, didn't throw an organized game there. Next thing you know, this guy's in Grand Prairie, Texas, pitching for something called the Air Hogs before he got a call from the Diamondbacks. Then he had to go back there and pitch again before he got a call for the Braves. And ultimately, the biggest calls he was getting was some called strike threes, of course. But when that bullpen phone rang, he was answering that call on a nightly basis for the Braves. So there's a lot to like about Tyler Matzek, and it all starts with his mentality, with his ability to be a resilient person, let alone pitcher, make his way back to the big leagues and make such an impact as he has, with a fastball that approaches 96, 97 miles an hour on a regular basis, and a breaking ball, a slider that is about as unfilthy as could possibly be. One could call it unfair, and they wouldn't be wrong. And you can ask the Dodgers about that. So there's a lot of things to like about what this guy does. In fact, I can't find too many blemishes on when you're building a bullpen. having a big, high leverage left-hander that can blow guys away. Tyler Matzek filled that role, and I don't think that you could have scripted it any better for him when it comes to the comeback. So everything, all roads led to October, and ultimately, I guess, a couple days in November in which Tyler Matzek got to sit on top of the world.
Yeah, I mean, if not for Walt Weiss being on staff, on Brian Snitker's staff, you wonder, because of his connection, obviously, having been in Colorado when they got Matzek, whether or not he even would have wound up in Atlanta. So just a lot of things, just, when you look back and take that big step back, and I'm sure, he's had a lot of opportunities to do that with everything going on in baseball or not going on in baseball right now. Just, a lot of things aligned for him to be a Brave and be a big contributor for them. I will say, and you mentioned the walks. I think one of the few gripes with him too was the curveball has been a little bit troublesome. It led to a 667 average against last year. He only threw 27 of them though, and he almost completely abandoned it as the year went on. He threw it in 3 games from August 15th on, compared to 27 games in appearances before that. But opponents hit 131 against the slider, 192 on the 4-seamer. So I wouldn't expect to see much change in his approach, over that success that he had during last season, of course, in the postseason. Just, as you mentioned, one of the best stories in baseball. And I do want to go back to that moment you mentioned, being there in attendance at Truist Park, no outs, runners on, second and third, and the Braves clinging to that 2-run lead in Game 6. Proceeds to strike out Albert Pujols, Steven Souza, and Mookie Betts, the last of those coming on 3 straight pitches. Of course, lets out that guttural scream. It was almost a potential turning point in the series, Grant. And I think when you look back and you mentioned Rosario and Soler, I think that moment, what he was able to provide in that moment for the Braves is something that's going to last for a long, long time in people's memory banks.
I definitely agree with that. And you kind of look at certain moments where you feel like you can point to that and say, this is when I knew this Braves club could go all the way. This is when I felt the validation that you need to feel that you could get over the hump you couldn't in 2020, despite having a 3-1 lead. This was a series that wasn't going to slip through the Braves' fingers, and it was performances like that that made it a reality. And just being there, Tyler Matzek wasn't the only person screaming at the top of his lungs when he got done with that strikeout. I mean, it was as deafening and as electric as a ballpark or a sporting arena or sporting event can be. And he was really the guy that made it all happen. And, we're going to talk a lot about the bullpen going forward and guys that made contributions throughout the year. But yeah, this late shift thing, I want to kind of go back to that, the night shift that they had going on here. These guys came together, and it was a next man up mentality because you knew that the Braves rotation needed all the help it could get. And once the night shift clocked in, they never really seemed to clock out. And that's a big reason why the Braves were hoisting that trophy at the end of that series as well. Not to mention all of the successes they had down the stretch when there were lots of questions about, well, who's pitching the 9th inning? How confident are we in that? But I kind of want to go back and point to what the group was able to do. Sometimes it doesn't really matter who the last guy to throw is. You're not going to get there with a lead if you don't get through the 6th, the 7th, the 8th inning. And Tyler Matzek was a big part of that. So I think if you're looking at a kind of an unsung hero for the regular season, maybe file him under one of those. If you're looking for just one of the great October heroes for the Braves, Tyler Matzek is on the short list most certainly. And as I tweeted at the time after that strikeout of Mookie Betts, go ahead, build the statue.
Well, as we look for what's ahead for him, I mean, it's difficult when you look at StatCast numbers to put his 2021 up against his 2020 because obviously it was a shortened season. But before that, I mean, his previous run with the Rockies was in 14 and 15 before the real advent of the StatCast era even really happened. But what still matters from those advanced stats from this past season, where he was an 89th percentile at expected ERA, he was 92nd percentile in expected average, 96th percentile in expected slugging, numbers that, and I forgive the detour into wrestling territory here, Grant, but these numbers were all elite. So after a strong regular season and a defining postseason, what are you looking for out of Tyler Matzek in 2022?
I really think it's more of the same. And if you look at the projection services for him, I think that that's more or less what people are looking for. The important thing, I think, when we parse through all these statistics, and I would take the Rockies version of Tyler Matzek and put it in a completely different box somewhere in the attic or the basement or wherever, because this is a different guy, different pitcher, different skill set at this point, different mentality, different just about everything. So I expect more of the same because he's shown us this is who he is now. There is no, well, he got hot for a month or two and really carried us for a while when we needed it. And then, he either got hurt or flamed out or wasn't there for the big moments, the big games. And those were some of the things that some of the early 90s Braves teams had to deal with. They'd get a guy in to close or set up, and then bam, all of a sudden that guy would get hurt. Another guy would step up, and then he'd get hurt. And then they'd trade for somebody. And it was all of that. But you didn't see a lot of that for the Braves bullpen in 2021. And when they tried to, the guy they did go out and get really wasn't much of a factor when you think about the postseason, certainly because he was not on the roster. And that's, of course, Richard Rodriguez. And it was really the guys you had in-house that stepped up and did it. And I think the mentality for Matzek, not to mention the arm talent, is what the Braves are going to be looking for more of in 2022 and beyond. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a pitcher that, despite being 31 years of age coming into this year, they're going to have under control for 3 more seasons, at least under the previous collective bargaining agreement rules. We'll see how that all plays out and stick a pin in CBA discussions. But you have to be excited to have this guy around and know that this is a premium reliever, a quality arm that you can build your bullpen around, in addition to some of his friends that also stepped up in a big-time way in the biggest of moments for the Braves.
We're going to get into Will Smith in a later episode. And even with Smith's strong playoffs, I'm sure there's people out there that, plenty that are going to want to see Matzek get an opportunity to close games. But, he really is that Swiss Army knife. And I think that defining of a role for him, it just doesn't really benefit what he's able to do. He appeared in the 6th inning 13 times this past season, the 7th 29 times, the 8th 24 times, the 9th 7 times, and he pitched in extras twice. He also made 3 appearances in the 5th inning or before. I guess in my opinion with him, having a defined closer is almost one of the biggest luxuries for him, because it allows you to kind of use him where you need him to, as opposed to just saying, and Jim Johnson years ago told me this in spring training, he loved to be a guy that knew exactly when he was coming out. But I think having the other guys having that allows you to use Matzek in a way that's maybe most beneficial to him.
Yeah, I think that it is. And guys just kind of want to know their role so that they can understand. And I'm not trying to get into the wrestling parlance either, because The Rock had always talked about how important it is to know your role. And Tyler Matzek, Luke Jackson, AJ Minter, Will Smith, and others, I think they kind of knew where they were, especially come October. I don't see them going away from that whatsoever. I mean, sure, they could sign or trade for another player and bring it into this bullpen mix. And maybe you'll see some of these younger arms who've been around and kind of been in the starting role for a while. Perhaps they'll transition to the bullpen. And what a great guy to be a mentor for them than a guy like Tyler Matzek, who was in a starting role for a while and has now found his success as a reliever. I think that kind of stuff's valuable as well, in addition to how they deploy him, which, whether it's the 6th, 7th, 8th, or the 9th inning, when the game's on the line, this is an arm you can count on, and you want to have those guys in bunches. And Tyler Matzek is, again, I think, head of the pack right now when it comes to the talented relievers in the Braves bullpen. Regardless of what inning he enters the game.
Well, one of the best stories in all of baseball. And I think among anybody on that Braves roster, it's going to be incredibly exciting to see how Tyler Matzek follows up his 2021 postseason successes. We are far from done with our Stock Watch series, but if you miss any of the shows, make sure you go back and check out the archives. We've done so many so far, and hope you enjoy all of them. Also, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you get an alert for every new episode of Battery Power. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Graham McAuley. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time, Braves Country.